Have you ever heard that the correct name for a group of ferrets is a business? Have you ever heard of a cauldron of bats, a skulk of foxes, or a thunder of hippos? Collective nouns are words that we use to refer to a group of things. Common ones are, say, a herd or a flock or a pack. But the English language in particular has a tradition of creating whimsical, comical, even absurd names for groups of things. Some are so common you might never have thought of them, like a panel of judges, a fleet of ships, or even a party of adventurers. Others are well known, like a murder of crows. Their story is one of linguistic history, but it is also a surprising window into the past. The large variety and silliness of many English collective nouns can be traced to the 15th century and seems to have come out of Norman hunting culture. The words were known as venereal terms or terms of venery. Today, the word venereal has a rather different meaning, but archaically it refers to hunting, from the Latin venari, meaning to chase or pursue. The monk in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales says that he is an outrider that loved venery, meaning hunting, not anything carnal. The term venison comes from the same root. David Dalby, in Lexicon of the Medieval German Hunt, says that the conscious cultivation of correct hunting language had its origin in medieval France, and from France it made its way to England via the Norman conquest. Dalby describes the language as an extensive proliferation of terms, whereby different names were given the same feature in different animals. This wasn't just limited to groupings of animals either. In English, we have many words for an animal's home, including a nest for birds, a lair for foxes or otters, a burrow for a rabbit, or a den for a lion. Dalby argues the language was artificial and self conscious, but was nonetheless tied to the hunt, an important social part of courtly life, and an integral piece of what it meant to be a noble. It was the greatest leisurely activity for nobles in the Middle Ages. Knowing the language was something of a code. The uninitiated would be unable to converse. In Arthur Conan Doyle's novel Sir Nigel, set in the first century, Nigel is teased by an old knight when he calls a group of swine a herd. No man of gentle birth would speak of a herd of swine. Hunting was considered honorable and was often highly regimented. The danger of the hunt was part of the ritual. Gaston III, Count of Foix, actually wrote that nobles should not hunt by efficient means, with the bow or with traps. I speak of this against my will, he said, of those practices, for I should only teach how to take beast nobly and gently. It was a key part of adolescence for young male nobles, who would be taught from a young age, and many of the skills, like horse riding, terrain assessment, and weapon use, translated easily to warfare. Among the earliest examples of these teaching books, called Books of Courtesy, is L'Art de Venerie, an Anglo Norman text written about 1327 by William Twitty, huntsman to King Edward II. Twitty's book is written as a conversation between a hunter and his apprentice about the intricacies and terms of hunting. This includes various names for boar. He's at first called Pig of the Sounder, so long as he sucks the mother. And when the mother deserts him, they are called Gorgons. In the third year, they are called Hog steers. And after the fourth, they are called boars. A similar naming system applied to male red deer, which Twitty says starts as a calf and in ensuing years becomes a brocket, a spayard, and a soar, a great soar, and finally, a hart. Just as complex were the names of the various branches of the hart's antlers, up to 32 tines. If there were more than 32 tines, he says, it was not a hart of this world. This book and others were meant as educational handbooks for the young noble. Multiple other such texts exist, all of which built up the technical knowledge of the hunt, from terminology and strategy to horn calls. Other early texts include the French Livre de Chasse, written by Gaston III, Count of Foix, in the late 1380s, and the Duke of York's Master of Game, an English translation of Gaston's written between 1406 and 1413, or the much later short treatise on hunting, which was compiled for the delight of the noblemen and gentlemen. The tradition of creating these terms was well established by the mid 15th century, when a 1450 text lists dozens of terms for various groups of animals, including herds of hart and deer, a covey of partridges, a watch of nightingales, a flight of goshawks, a rout of gentlemen, an execution of officers, an eloquence of lawyers, a congregation of plovers, and exaltation of larks. That same text contains numerous other specific items. For example, how a heart flees can be described differently. When it flees downstream, it floats. When it flees upstream, it breaks. It's also clear that while the terms may have started out as serious ones, by the middle 15th century, they were also being used humorously. In the 1476 book Horse, Sheep, and Goose, printed by William Caxton in the same year that he introduced the printing press to England, they add the term a pity of prisoners. Probably the most influential book as far as terms of venery goes was published in 1486, today known as the Book of St. Albans. It's also known by the more descriptive Book of Hawking, Hunting, and Blazing of Arms. Like the earlier venery books, its primary purpose was to be a handbook of various gentlemanly interests. The book has its own controversies, often attributed to Dame Juliana Berners. Her existence and the idea that she authored the text is subject to significant scholarly debate. The primary evidence for her authorship comes from one sentence in the original version that says the second part was explicit Dame Juliana Barnes in her book of hunting. Her name has also been rendered Bairns or Berners. She is described as a prioress of the Priory of St. Mary of Sopwell, but concrete evidence of her existence or who her family is lacking. Joseph Hazelwood, in an 1810 edition of the book, only attributes the section on hunting to Barnes and possibly part of the hawking section. Her name has also become attached to one of the earliest publications on fishing, added in a 1496 edition. The ending session on coats of arms says the section was translated and compiled. Her authorship would make it among the earliest books authored by a woman. The Cambridge History of English and American Literature instead concludes the book is certainly not an original work, and that the greater part of the sections on hawking and hunting are derived from Twitty's L'Art de Venery. Ernest Fraser Jacob, in Essays in Later Medieval History, says that Juliana versified Twitty's work and added information from Master of the Game. However much of it she may have written, she has become closely associated with terms of venery. The test is given as an address to a pupil and said to have been passed down from Sir Tristram of the Round Table, who was closely associated with hunting. Sir Thomas Malory in Le Morte d'Arthur says that Tristan devised good fanfares to blow for beast of venery and beasts of the chase and all kinds of vermin, and all of the terms we still have in hawking and hunting. She begins the text, My dear child, take heed of how Tristan doth tell you how many manner beasties of venery there were. In the verse, she describes how harts go in herds, roe deer go in bevies, pigs in sounders, and wolves in routs. But while the Albans book has numerous interesting aspects, by far the section that is most talked about in the modern era is appended after the hunting section, where more than 150 collective nouns are listed, for everything from birds and leopards to painters and merchants. While much of the book is clearly meant to be taken seriously as a guide, the terms listed afterwards clearly show the levity of the period as well. More than half of the terms have nothing to do with beasts, birds, or hunting at all. It includes some of the same terms, such as an execution of officers or an eloquence of lawyers, as earlier texts, but adds many more, such as a skulk of friars, a threatening of courtiers, a misbelief of painters, a cluster of churls, a gaggle of women, a superfluity of nuns, a herd of harlots, a sentence of judges, a fighting of beggars, a poverty of pipers, and a harmony of harpers. Maidens were a rage, boys a blush, husbands a multiplying. Groups of wives, meanwhile, were called an impatience. Some seem to play on the jobs. A group of masters is an example. A group of hermits, quite an oxymoron, and observance, while butchers were a goring. A group of jugglers were listed as a never thriving. Animals got plenty of terms as well, from a pride of lions and a sloth or sleuth of bears to a shrewdness of apes and a richness of martens. Again, these were not always neutral terms. Certainly, there's some connotation to calling lions a pride, while curs, likely referring to dogs with a propensity to growl, were a cowardice. This is also where we get some of the more lasting terms. This is the business of ferrets, a flock of sheep, a murder of crows, and an unkindness of ravens. The list also includes a murmuration of starlings, a peep of chickens, a labor of moles, a baron of mules, a kindle of kittens, and a leap of leopards. Some final terms refer to things even further afield, from a school of fish and a swarm of bees to a cluster of grapes and a rage of teeth. Hans Meyer, in his essay Animals in English, published in 1980, also records more obscure or obsolete terms, like a form for a hare burrow or earth for a foxhome. A 1686 quotation shows different words for an animal retreating into their home. A fox kinneleth, a badger eartheth, and an otter watcheth. A boar coucheth. The terms go beyond that as well. Master of the Game records different terms for the droppings of different game, and other passages use unique words for tracks. A buck's prints were a view or a fuse, a stag's a slot, and other beasts could be a strain or a footing. The 1595 The Gentleman's Academy was an edited version of the Book of St. Albans and helped to popularize some of the terms therein. The terms remained well past their context, and some have become standard, but they were not necessarily well liked by some academics. In 1888, the New English Dictionary, which is today the Oxford English Dictionary, called such terms very fantastical and far fetched. And when it listed the terms, often said that they were merely an alleged name for a company of. They were also dubbed artificial terms invented in the 15th century. The terms in the Albans book were interesting enough that John Hodgkin wrote Proper Terms, an essay that sought to find a rational explanation of Dame Berner's list. Many of the terms have fallen by the wayside or were only ever used in these lists, and most lack any real standardization. Thus, there is a smack or bloom of jellyfish. Chaucer wrote a poem called A Parliament of Fowls, and C.S. Lewis used the term Parliament of Owls in Chronicles of Narnia. Many have been used as book titles, such as James Lipton's Exaltation of Larks, itself about collective nouns, real and fanciful. W.S. Scott's Clowder of Cats, and Eric Partridge's A Charm of Words. C. E. Hare, in the 1949 book The Language of Field Sports, adds terms like a basque of crocodiles, an obstinacy of buffaloes, and a tower of giraffes. Interest in creating new terms purely for entertainment value has lasted longer than the concept of terms of venery. The internet is awash with lists. Wikipedia has an appendix of English collective nouns that includes words like an armory of aardvarks, a bridge of admirals, an accompaniment of condiments, a conjunction of grammarians, or squeal of nieces. Lipton mentions a California doctor publishing his own list for doctors in a bulletin of the Mensa Society, including a joint of osteopaths, a rash of dermatologists, and a pile of proctologists. Many of these collective nouns have simply become part of language, things like a litter of puppies, or a pod of whales, or a clutch of eggs, and generic ones like colonies or flocks or herds have stuck, but they're really not so much fun as the ones that are intended to be humorous or absurd, which can give surprising clues to historians, because they might tell historians what people at the time thought of a particular animal or a particular job based on what we called them. Because after all, it would be funny if we didn't get the joke. And of course, the modern world has continued our need for these. That's why we know that we have a network of servers or a string of texts. You can find entire lists of these things online, some of them meant just to entertain or be facetious, but they are concrete parts of culture, and they offer a unique connection to people who were making the exact same types of lists a millennium ago. But of course, dictionaries of lexicographers might scoff at them, but I think most of us can accept them for what they are. What is your favorite term of venery? What should we call a group of History Guy fans? I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community at Locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.